Hey guys, Liana here. It's Tatas Tuesday. And I'm going to get a little technical today instead of dealing with an issue. Well, it's kind of an issue, but it's more like a concept. If you don't recognize this game is Gone Home. And I picked it for this exercise just because I'm amused at how crazy this game drives people for various reasons. A lot of people insist that it's not a game and like it's not a video game, which to me is absurd because of course it's a video game. I'm using WASD. I'm using the mouse as a camera and the whole thing. Other people complain about the fact that the game was so highly rated and this all ties in, and I shouldn't jump ahead of myself. The thing about ratings is that they are by nature subjective. When people review a game, it's based on their opinion, and opinions are subjective. Blah 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 blah. Um, you know, Opinions are inherently subjective. Some people will love one game that, somebody else completely hates and vice versa. And the reason we have a bunch of reviewers is that it's more useful to find a few reviewers that seem to match your taste, that like the same things you like and dislike the same things you dislike for the most part. So that, you can, how do I put this? So you can find an opinion that's similar to yours. Because what's the whole point of a review? A review is not about whether something's popular or not. A review is about whether you're going to like it. It's a question of, whether it's worth spending your money, not someone else's money, not an average person's money, your freaking money. And the problem with aggregate sites like Metacritic and Rotten Tomatoes and all that stuff is it becomes about how popular a product is in terms of the majority of reviewers, as opposed to art being a very individual thing about whether people are going to like it or not. Art is not based on facts. Art is based on preference. And a movie that was considered a terrible movie, a bomb, movies like, John Carter and Hudson Hawk and things like that. I happen to love those movies. I think they're great movies. I find them exceptionally entertaining. That old Sylvester Stallone movie, Oscar, that everybody panned, the I happen to like those movies. And that's all that matters. You don't get a prize for having common tastes when it comes to entertainment. It's entertainment, right? And that's the funny thing I find when people get so upset about whether a critic liked a game or not, or whether a game has an 80 or something on Metacritic. Now, okay, it's more serious with Metacritic just because some developers bonuses, and that is ridiculous thunder, by the way. But I don't like the idea that people get bonuses based on something completely subjective like ratings. But I understand the reasons for it. It actually is a check against just being totally, it's weighting someone's merit pay based on two things you can't entirely control instead of one thing you can't entirely control. A developer cannot entirely control sales because marketing is part of that. And a developer can't entirely control ratings. So the idea is the developer picks what they feel more comfortable not controlling in terms of this false concept of merit that we get into with video games. And some things regarding merit are totally fair. To There's the map. Um, to say if a game has frame rate issues, if a game has obvious bugs like crash to desktop bugs, if a game has somebody talking while you're trying to do a YouTube video, hopefully I'm not talking, but things like that, you know, I'm gonna wait for this kid to stop talking. Okay, Sam. Okay, I'm gonna keep talking because hopefully this is quiet enough because this is boring. But, you know, things like um, the fact that the rainstorm is way too loud based on what's going on in the windows, that's a fair thing. That's an objective thing. Whether or not you like the story of this game, see, there's thunder, but then you wait for the corresponding lightning, and it never happens. There's a bit of a flicker there, but I didn't really see a flash. So that's something you can talk about, you know, the weather effects being very limited. That is something you can talk about merit-wise. And why are we talking about this on Tatas Tuesday? Because there are obituary. There are, you know, issues of I never caught that she had pink hair before. Okay. There are issues that we can objectively talk about merit, things like that. But then when you get into concepts like who has the best ideas, these are or can be exceptionally subjective. And we're talking about this on Tatas Tuesday because when we get into the question of, you know, gender and gaming and we get into these issues of merit. We get into these issues of, oh, look, perfect. You can do better. Hey, vey. We get into these issues of agency as well. And somebody asked me on Twitter about agency in gaming, which is one of my big things I would like to personally impact on the discussion of gaming. None of this is really important to you guys. This is all like not really story points, but environmental points that we're collecting here. And that's the bulk of this game. The object of this game, in terms of the criticisms that Gone Home is not a game, the object of this game is to find out what happened to your family. And, you know, when you do that, you complete the game. So it is a video game. The problem, not a problem, but the unique challenge we get into with video games is it's both a story and an element of game theory. And as I was saying, if I contribute one thing to gaming thought, it is a shift in the concepts of merit and agency when it comes to video games. Because I think that the rigid sociological definitions of agency are teenager book are not especially helpful. Is she gonna start talking again? No, okay. They're not especially helpful when it comes to games because, okay, agency is basically your ability to act with free will in a world. And that's a very complex thing in the real world. And I think agency is an important thing to discuss in you know, in the real world, there would be consequences to taking books and flinging them all around everywhere. Then you find your dad's Playboy. Ha ha ha. See, there, I wish I could fling that too. This game doesn't let you do that. And that's when we get into the discussion of the intersection point of agency and player freedom in video games. And I could write a really boring paper on this that 100 people would read. I'd rather make YouTube videos that a couple thousand people and upwards might read because it helps more people. It's actually creating dialogue within an industry instead of, all right, I have to find this. Instead of just primarily benefiting me in terms of money and position and tenure and all that stuff in a university. I'd much rather actually contribute, than just feather my nest in academia. And that's probably a dumb choice, right? That's probably a dumb choice. It doesn't benefit me very much. But, I care about gaming, and this is going to get turned off because it's annoying. But, I decided to play Gone Home because this is a good example of agency within a game. How much free will do you have in this game? Well, a fair bit, but it's limited. You can explore the game somewhat non-linearly. Some things do open up based on, various things. But there are certain... Oh, Sam's talking again.
You know that feeling where the first moment...
That has never happened to me, by the way.
...a big gold star around them, and you have to get to know them. Well, there's this girl. I think she's a senior. She's usually dressed kind of punk. But sometimes I see her in this, army uniform. She's always drawing in this notebook, looking so intense. I had no idea how I would ever, have an excuse to talk to her.
No.
She and her friends hang out and play Street Fighter at the 7-Eleven.
And in some games, you'd be able to light these candles and, be able to, pick up the pizza box as well as open and close it, and those sort of sandboxy elements are, considered maximizing player freedom, maximizing player agency. Now, this has nothing to do with character agency. And Gone Home is a very, very interesting game in that way because the character as an individual has very little agency. She can't control what's happening in the story. You cannot change what happens because, like the BioShock games, the bulk of the story per se, the narrative that you're discovering is happening past tense, and you're just trying to find out what happened. You're exploring a story that's already been completed. However, as a proxy for the player, you guys can see I'm picking up pillows, I'm flinging them around. I am affecting the world. And, all the matches are gone. Oh no. And so this is where agency, the concept of agency in games gets more complex than a movie. No, I'm not. That's loud. It gets more complex than in the real world. And obviously, we don't tend to talk about social agency in terms of whether I can pick up a coaster and throw it across the room. It's a different type of agency than in a video game. But there is a cross point. There's an intersection point, isn't there? And this is what makes talking about the agency of characters in video games so difficult, because there's the player proxy element of the character to consider, and then there's what the character can and can't do in their world. And the actual agency of a character in their world usually has very little to do with how social critics respond to a game. And it's funny because they seem to be obsessed with agency, right? I mean, in this game, in Gone Home, the main character has relatively little agency regarding her family or her immediate world. Her life went on without her, right? She can't do anything about what's going on, but she is the main character. Now, somebody would that's cute, that part, I admit. But if this were a sociological study, people would be horrified. Oh God, they've abandoned their child and all this stuff. But for the purposes of the game, they're the playable character, and they immediately have their agency. I won't say artificially lifted, but it is lifted, and it makes how we talk about the main character and the main character's place in the game very, very different than if we were doing a sociological case study, right? And that's why I think it's so important to redefine. And I'm going to throw books again. Oh, you can't throw books. See, I should be able to throw books everywhere. But this is a little indie game. We give it a bit of a pass. But, this is what I find so interesting and yet infuriating about discussions of games, especially when it comes to, women and minority issues in games. It's that we take these sociological concepts and we take these linear narrative concepts and we try to just apply them. Oh no, she's talking again. I'm going to cut the damn audio completely. There we go. So, and I'm pulling out my earphones so I don't have to hear her yammering. But we can't really approach a game using the tools of movies or using the tools of sociology. We can't. We can certainly inform our perspectives using those approaches, but you're going to get, you're not going to be able to draw a straight line with a curved ruler. You need the right tools for the job. And this is what I'm trying to accomplish in my discussion of video games. It's from a perspective of gender, but that's just because, I'm using something I know the lingo for to try to get better tools for games. And I think that that's far more useful than, just analyzing a particular game and having this massive fight about a game, whether it be Gone Home or God of War or Halo or anything. I think testing the tools and refining the tools we have should be our priority right now. And because we're debating, every time somebody has an opinion about a game, there's an entire group of people online who seek to attack that person as an individual, not their ideas, but them as an individual. And it's really unhelpful because that doesn't allow us to get better tools. Okay? If you look at some of, the people we hold up as great thinkers, they were involved in a ton of corruption, usually, because just surviving in, an academic or professional space, you have to navigate corruption. Everything's corrupt. Wherever you get people, you get corruption. And, you have to do your best. Every person to, quote, Boardwalk Empire, has to figure out how much sin they can personally handle. And, gamers have been saying for a while now, too much sin for our liking lately, thanks. And that's totally fair. But the problem, and I think the reason we end up with all these personality politics or politics of identity, is we don't have good tools to talk about games. We're starting. We have our own concepts like, ludonarrative dissonance. And that's great. But we need tools to start talking about things like, player character agency, as opposed to just player agency in isolation or character agency in isolation. We need a term to talk about how the character interacts with the game world as a player proxy, because I think that's more important than either player agency or character agency in isolation. And I mean, you know, for instance, if you look at a game like Gone Home, this character has very little influence over the events of her world. But people still think it's a good game. Um and the reality of the that it's a female character and it's non-violent and all these things are held up as why it's a good game. Those are actually points of why it's a good story. It has nothing to do with being a good game. You know, my criticism about Gone Home as a game is, and this is where the 10 out of 10, you notice there's no mirror in this bathroom? That's done deliberately because the main character has no body. Woo, invisible. Okay? The only way you know what you look like is through things like portraits in the game and your passport photo and things like that. It is a very artificial experience as a game. And that's where, gameplay advocates get really upset that this game got 10 out of 10. I don't care what the score is on a game. Somebody can love it. They can think it's perfect for what it is, fine. Because every game has technical limitations from where it's made, okay? We're not going to have perfection in that way yet. But we can point out that in terms of feeling connected to a character, see, there's no body, but the drawer won't open because the ghost body is in the way. To me, that's a dissonant moment from a game design perspective. Now, does that mean the story isn't fabulous? No, it doesn't mean the story isn't fabulous. Does it get in the way of the play experience? Well, I think in a sense it does. I think that the physicality of a character is important. And I think that, oh, she's talking again. I think that for someone who is female, it's going to be easier to relate to this floating cursor because it's more like them. But for somebody who is less like the, very blonde woman that we're inhabiting in this game, it's hard to connect because of the fact that there is no body. They can't look in a mirror and see a face looking back at them. And these are AAA expectations. I'm not criticizing the game for not having it. This is the difference to me between criticism and critique. I'm pointing this stuff out. I'm speculating about why people could have trouble, relating to this game. And I think part of why people are like, it's not really a game or nothing happened or all that stuff is because people had difficulty connecting to the main character. And that is, I'd say it's probably a design limitation because of how this game was made and the small development team behind it. But, it is something that subjectively some people won't be able to connect to. And that's totally fair for the people that can't connect that. It's a very subjective thing. And this is why we need better tools. We don't have the vocabulary to even really know what we're talking about between two people automatically, right? When we talk about a shot, and this is another problem in games a lot, we talk about gaze theory because we do have cameras. But in a movie, a viewer has no agency within the film. They have no ability to do anything about what's going on the screen. In a game, you do. So this idea that, of male gaze, quote unquote, whenever a camera is centered on someone's flying saucers, we'll say, there is a huge difference technically and experientially between the game or the movie forcing you to look at something, which is the point of male gaze theory. Bible, blasphemy. Uh, that's the point. The camera is forcing you to look at a woman's boobs. In a lot of games that people are like, oh, you can zero in on her boobs. That is a player's choice. Very, very different as far as I'm concerned. It's just procedurally, it's completely different than having to do it because a third party is making you, the director's vision. And that happens in cutscenes. But when you have camera control, you can't really, gaze theory in video games is more about third person versus first person, as opposed to male versus female. And it's because of the fact that, you get these first person games, your character doesn't have a body. It's very difficult to get somebody, sorry, my wrist is hurting, guys. I've been having carpal tunnel issues, and so keyboard and mouse gameplay is a little difficult for me now. He's Tegitori, so cute. See, that's me being able to do that in a game. In a movie or something that's more on rails, I would not be able to do that. And this is the stuff that drives me crazy when I see people, and well-meaning people, applying, film theory or sociological theory to games. And they get these crazy, oh, gasp, think of the children results. It's because there's no course that's like game studies, the same way you can take a course on film studies or radio and television. When we take courses on games, they're usually about game design, or they're a sociology course or a humanities course that borrows practices and analytical tools from other types of media. And that's crazy. Could you imagine having to review a film like a book? You'd have ridiculously unhelpful results, wouldn't you? And reviewing or examining a game like a film is the same way. It's not helpful, and it's not helpful to the dialogue. It's not Bible, blasphemy. Oh, it didn't fall on the floor enough. See, I would never do this in the real world, but it's fun in the game because, well, if you know anything about the plot of the game, it makes sense in a way, but, this is just me screwing around because there is no real world consequence. If you're wondering what I'm doing, I'm looking for a bathroom because I'm an asshole. Is this a bathroom? Yes. And this is a perfect example. I'm something I never do in real life. But it's a game, so it's not real. And this is the important thing about games, and this is why it is a game, because you can do it. The toilet's closed. I was going to throw the Bible in the toilet. Ugh, you're right. But I would never do that in the real world. I respect religion, obviously, but it's a game, and it's not me. For God's sakes, I'm not blonde. And, this is the thing about a game that you'd never do that in a movie. Could you imagine a film study? Oh, it's making a societal point that someone would choose to throw a Bible in a toilet if there were no consequences. No, I did it precisely because it is taboo in the real world. And I have respect for that. And that's why I wouldn't do it in the real world. But in a game, it's not me. It's an exploration of a concept to see what it's like. Do I feel kind of bad right now that I was going to throw a Bible in a toilet? Yeah, I do feel kind of bad. But I don't feel that bad because I knew it was wrong. And it's not real. And this is a very important aspect of play. And the fact that I can do this in Gone Home is why I will defend it as a game. Not necessarily as a narrative. Narrative's very subjective. But is Gone Home a game? Yes, it is. Why? Because I just played in it, didn't I? And these are the reasons that we need our own language. And man, my wrist is killing me. I got to wrap this up. We need our own language in games, especially when it comes to dicey issues like minority representation and depiction of women in games. We really do need tools. We need tools so that we can go, all right, this is what this says in a video game. Not a movie, not a TV show, not a book, a video game. Otherwise, we're continuing to put developers and personalities and gamers en masse on in obscenity trials like they did with, Oscar Wilde back in the day. We think, we hear about what Oscar Wilde went through, and now we think it's silly. And people are going to look back on the freakouts about video games in the future and think it's just as silly and just as tragic. That there was all this fighting and all this emotional pain, and people lost their livelihoods, and people, had projects fail because of a culture war. And that's why we need tools for games. Because when we actually do break down and talk about, why people do these things, why good people do bad things in games, it's not because, in my case, I secretly have a desire to throw a Bible in a toilet. No. It was just funny because it's not real, and the joke relies on me knowing I was being an asshole. It's actually reinforcing morality when you do something is shitty in a video game. Because we talk about the fact that no, I would never do that. Absolutely not. It's wrong. Just the same way that people who like violent video games know, they wouldn't kill anybody in the real world. It's wrong. The fun, for lack of a better term, is being able to do things we know are wrong, to explore that space. It's the same reason actors who are super nice people tend to make the best villains, because it's acting. We can all feel, we can all be in on the joke because we know they're not really bad people. That's what makes it fun. If we think that somebody is really killing kittens in real life, while their dramatic portrayal of a bad guy isn't as fun for us, is it? We buy and we suspend disbelief, but if there's no disbelief to suspend, it's not as fun, is it? And so I'm going to continue my mission to provide new tools to games, and that's what I would like people to try to focus on now, is instead of talking about player agency or talking about character agency, try to focus on the character-player intersection when it comes to agency in a game. It yields some very interesting results, and I'm sure somebody will come up with a much cooler term, like sounds cool, like ludonarrative dissonance. Ooh, $1 million word. I'm sure somebody will come up with a better, like a Street Fighter cross Tekken, player cross character agency, whatever you want to call it. It's a starting point for real dialogue that's relevant to games, and we're actually going to get some, meaningful outcomes from discussions and examinations based on tools for games by people who understand games, instead of these borrowed tools that are the equivalent of trying to dig a hole with a spoon.